everyone's privacy. All right. All right. Who else has a question for Tom?
Hello. Well, my camera finally works, so let me show my face. Hello from Berlin. I've so many questions while I read the book, but many of them are so detailed. I don't think will be a lot of fun asking them here. But well, as I want to ask like two questions about the last part where you like positively suggest something. So one of them is like the corrective voting you talk about. And I was just wondering, I mean, of course, when you presented it, you were very optimistic about it, like being an improvement. I was just wondering, well, if you think about the social dynamics, whether this wouldn't end up in kind of the same as we already have. Because, well, those who can still have the veto can like block initiatives and kind of blackmail everyone else in kind of like, well, blocking things running, kind of making important changes if they don't agree to something positive they want to change. So I would imagine you kind of still have the power play, though it's maybe a bit more subtle and would get a slightly different dynamic, but I'm not sure whether like things would get extremely better. So maybe you can kind of try to convince me by saying something you haven't said so far.
Okay, I'll try. Thank you for expressing doubt, Sebastian. But one thing I was worried about is, oh, everybody's going to be so polite. They're not going to really, teach me anything by giving me any pushback. And I should observe, if it's not already evident from my sort of just nature, my demeanor, I am characteristically optimistic. I'm just built that way. And I count on other people to correct my excesses. But you can't count on me to get gloom and doom. It's just not what I'm good at. So it's very useful and probably, correct when people come in and they say, Tom, it's not going to be all wine and roses. It's going to be, there could be problems. In fact, Sebastian, one thing I'll say is I think you're doing me a favor by just saying your criticism is it's not going to be as awesome as you think. It's not. It's going to be terrible. There's going to be rich people eating babies in the street, in the private streets. At least you're not saying that. So here's one thing I can say after all those caveats. Prospera is actually doing something a little bit like corrective voting. I haven't actually unpacked all that. I didn't really work on the structure of the municipal government, although of course they had copies of my book and we talked about, my work there was like very vague. And then some people actually went in and kind of wrote the code for running kind of like a city. It's like a municipal government in Prospera, the ZA. It's a private community. And Eric Breiman, I guess he's CEO. He's a great guy. I've heard a couple of good podcasts with Eric recently. If you've never kind of met Eric, listen to his podcast. He's just a great character. I admire him so much. I don't mean character like a clown. I mean like, whoa, no, total not clown. Serious business hero guy. Eric Breiman. But he told me, he just said, we did something like that in the municipal government. So apparently something like, people who live there can veto acts of the municipal government. And I'm telling you that, Sebastian, because it's a little bit like a vote of confidence, right? It's helped me sell Ulex to be able to point to a map and say they're actually using it here, because everybody used to say it's when I would describe it. Is anybody using Ulex? And you're working on it. But now I can look at a place on the map and say they're doing it. And I can say that kind of with double democracy. Well, actually, I'm assuming they have something on the front end that lets people who own more units have more votes in the governance. It is a private community. I got to check that out too. But Eric told me they do have something that corrects excesses, if there are any, of the municipal government.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I didn't want to say that it wouldn't work. I was just worried that maybe we end up with nothing that much better.
Yeah,
right?
You did raise that point, and I didn't address that quite. And I'll say, I did say you could be right, and I'd be kind of happy. It'd be okay. I'm actually pretty happy with a lot of the way that the world runs now. We do live in the most prosperous, peaceful time we've probably seen ever. So if things get just a little better, I'm like, okay, that's positive. All right, I will say this. I'm actually excited about the dynamic I think would arise. I don't have anything but kind of a gut feeling, but to me it just feels right. I know, guys, I know this is being recorded and this is going to sound very unscientific, but I think it's fair to trust your gut in these large scale, complex systems. I read a lot of history because I don't, not to remember facts, but to kind of get a feel for the patterns, the rhythms of societies. Um, and I have a good feeling about double democracy. I think it will balance things nicely. Uh, I admit we have to try it out, and I'm hoping people, get a chance to try it out. Oh, one last thing, Sebastian, I'll say this isn't actually as kind of optimistic, but I will say it has occurred to me in the United States and probably in Germany too. Under the pandemic conditions, executives have been given a lot more power than formerly. In California, where I live, basically the governor is pretty much able to issue executive orders as he sees fit. It happens to be illegal, and I'm actually involved in litigation to make him stop. But the point is, functionally, what's going on, it's nothing new. I mean, good grief. This has happened a lot of times in history where you have a powerful executive who basically his will or her, usually his will is law. But California does have recall initiatives. It's like the legislature's disappeared. We got the governor, the legislature's still around. It's just not where the action is. We got the governor, and then in theory, and it's happening in my lifetime. I actually participated in the vote that recalled Gray Davis. I voted against him. I signed up to vote. I took my daughter with me to the voting booth to say, honey, we get to vote against something here today. This is very important. We don't have to vote for anything. It's all no. So anyhow, we could do that again to Gray Davis. So in a way, Sebastian, I could say, in a way, maybe, I don't know, I think this may be arguing for your point. It is, Tom, kind of like what we got already. I didn't think it would happen this way. I didn't project the pandemic, but in California and probably maybe in Germany, very powerful central authority. And then, the veto might be people go in the street. They don't have an initiative process where they can recall the prime minister, whoever the executive is, but they can get in the street and they can burn stuff, and they do that in America too. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
No,
You're welcome.
I don't want my face in there, nor yours.
Hi, Marilyn, do you have a question?
Nope.
Okay.
Just enjoying this very, very much. I thank everybody. This is fabulous. Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for joining us.
You bet.
I'd like to ask a question. Professor Bell, you kind of hinted in the last part of your book that Ulex could actually be implemented in software somehow. I was wondering if the smart contracts that run on the Ethereum system would be something that would be appropriate for that.
Oh, yes. As I think I mentioned, I have a paper that's been published now by the Journal of Special Jurisdictions. And don't worry, there were peer reviewers of my paper. I didn't just put it in there. In fact, they were pretty tough on me. I was overselling it. They told me to dial it back, Tom. You're not selling a used car here. Anyhow, so there's a paper that talks about that. And I think Ulex is really well designed, at least in the abstract. I'll say in the particular too, but in the abstract, it's designed well for distributed governance. Let's take I don't have the facts and figures at the tip of my tongue now, but you take the Ethereum network, it's got to be like tens of billions of dollars, US dollars worth of assets or more that are capitalized in that market. And, probably hundreds of millions of dollars of transactions are moving around every day on Ethereum. And it's not really clear what law applies. In a particular case, you could figure it out, but oh Lord, it'd be a nightmare. I mean, you'd have people in the standard Ethereum transaction all over the world. And I'm a very pragmatic lawyer, right? I mean, half of my time I'm working with clients. The stuff we do is very cutting edge and it takes a lot of creativity and it's not very safe always, but it's basically the same thing lawyers always do, which is look out for that sharp edge, watch out. I'm putting caution tape on that. No, we don't want to do that because we'll get sued is why. There's a lot of that going on. And here I'll say, man, EOS and Ethereum and Decred and all these other distributed communities, you're asking for trouble litigation wise. Oh my gosh, I would not want to run a business where And I know nobody's really running the business, but the point is the people running the system could be held liable. And you say, well, nobody's running the system. I'll say, you got to look more at the way the protocol works. If you're running a node in the network, you could totally be implicated in the transactions involved on the blockchain that you're hosting on your node. Oh, well, where will I get sued? And I say, exactly. And what law is going to apply? Yeah, you don't know, do you? You're going to find out the hard way. Well, they can't come and get me. Maybe not. But maybe someday you want to actually, travel to Monaco and not having a warrant out for your arrest. Anyhow, I'm overplaying it. This is the way you get when you're worried about, I can't say my clients, but I kind of feel like they're my people. I got a lot of people in the crypto space. I got some crypto. I had 2 clients working in this space, one after the other. And the short of it is, Ulex is a solution because that gives you the same law for everybody. That's one reason it's good. There's some other reasons too, but that's a good starting point is, wouldn't it be great if we had a law which has no flags attached for this decentralized community? It's kind of perfect, really. It's not why I created Ulex. I created Ulex basically for Honduras because it was looking a lot like colonialism, which it kind of was. Probably shouldn't say this because it's being recorded, but Paul Romer's initial charter cities scheme or pitch, which was not made to Honduras. Madagascar, I think, was the subject. It was kind of colonial feeling. It was like the Canadians will come and run part of your country. Sounds familiar. Anyhow, so that's why I created Ulex there, so we could have a flag-free legal system that's, uses best practices, but it's not like noticeably American or English or anything like that. And that would be great for these distributed communities that are basically, nowhere or everywhere. And that's one reason. I can give you some more why I think Ulex is going to be helpful there. And the way to build it in is pretty simple. I've actually drafted this, not computer code, but legal code, but I actually talk about it in the paper. EOS, for example, already has a choice of law and choice of form clause in their constitution, but they don't know apparently how to form a contract with the people using their network. So they got this kind of announcement kind of floating out here that the people that are in the network don't have to engage with. That's not the way to structure things. If you're building a system, you want to have people in privity of contract. You got to have them click OK. And when you do that, if you're going to do it right, you have them click OK to a clause that says Ulex will govern transactions in this network. And you need a forum, and that's a little trickier, but you need to choose a forum. And maybe EOS's online court would work. I haven't been impressed. I've heard some bad things about it. I'll stop there. I'm kind of over talking because I kind of spent 9 months deep into this crypto stuff, and I got a good paper out of it. It's interesting.
I'll read the paper. Thanks. That's a great suggestion.
Sure. It's got lots of graphs. There's lots of pictures again. I think this one, though, golly, I don't know if this one's out yet. I think it's coming out in the book. I'm not super excited about having it as a book chapter because it's really hard to get stuff out of copyright when it's a book chapter. Whereas Journal of Special Jurisdictions is right there online. Thank you, Journal of Special Jurisdictions. Well, you're welcome, Tom.
Very good. Thank you.
I guess you could use chat too if you're shy or something. I can read chat questions if you want to put them there.
I got another question if you're available.
Sorry?
Joe's the boss.
You mentioned that you knew Spencer McCallum, but his grandfather, Spencer Heath, wrote this marvelous book called Citadel Market and Altered.
Oh, yeah.
I believe Joe is planning to print it.
Yeah.
It's going back, and thanks to Joyce's magnificent effort with Spencer, the upgrades have been made, and that Spencer Heath recommended himself, and it's going to hopefully go to press soon. But one thing that Spencer Heath really stressed in his design of what he called a proprietary community, which is sort of like, what you would call a private city or a SEZ. He emphasized the importance of the proprietor of the community owning all of the land and leasing parcels rather than selling them. And he spent a fair amount of time in his book explaining why that makes it better. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think is that a good idea? Do you have opinion on that?
I do have opinions about that. I want to go back to kind of repeat what I think you were doing, which was praising Spencer McCallum and his grandfather. Spencer Heath for their work, both of those gentlemen. And Spencer Heath, I think I'll just say, you know, ICG is going to have an announcement about that self-same book which you mentioned, and Spencer Heath's book. So that's coming up. I'm a big fan of both gentlemen. There's a very touching story about their names, the similarity too, but I won't get into that. I'll get back to what you're asking about, which is basically MTIPs, multiple tenant income properties. Yes, both Spencer Heath and Spencer McCallum were fans of MTIPs, multiple tenant income properties, and a lot of people are. I've been looking at it for Free Society, and without saying where that's going, I'll just say I found interesting in that research this link between land value taxes or ground rents, but it's usually put forth as the Georgia's land value taxes model, and MTIPs. And it's not hard to spell the relationship out, and I'm not the first to notice it. I mean, Spencer, and I'm sure both Spencer McCallum and Heath, Spencer Heath talked about that too. And it boils down to this. With an MTIP, you have one party collecting the rents, which means the economic revenue, that are caused solely by the land itself, not the improvements on top of it. And George allegedly proved, I haven't checked his math, but people whose opinions I respect say, yeah, it checks out. George, the economist, Henry George, proved that that's the most efficient tax. You could say the only efficient tax. And the same arguments apply when there's no government involved and it's a purely private community. So I'm a big fan of MTIPs. I think they basically replicate in the private context the land value tax, which Henry George, the economist, pretty well established as the most efficient tax. By the way, I could add, as I will write about someday, I've been collecting the sites, such luminaries as Adam Smith and yes, kind of Milton Friedman. And Hayek says some good things about it. All those parties have basically said good things about land value taxes, which is a great sign. The last thing I'll say is, as you know from your next government, I'm personally a fan of residential cooperative corporations or other communities, residential cooperative organizations, we'll say. Because while I think it's great when you have like a hotel, say, you know, Harrods has this big hotel casino in Las Vegas, and they own the whole property and they lease it out to, you know, a gift shop on the first floor, and then maybe somebody has a shoe shine shop and all kinds of stuff. It's huge. It's like a small city, as Spencer Heath and Spencer McCallum both observed. I think it's great, except I'm not sure it's going to build the kind of community that I want to live in, because communities are more than just, of course, a roof on your head and the elevator service and all that. It's about the people you live with and the way you govern your lives together. And the nice thing about a residential cooperative community is you still have a single owner, but the people in the community own that owner. So when you live in a residential cooperative community, you are leasing property. So it is the MTIP model. You're leasing property. So it could be a long-term lease like in Hong Kong or Singapore, or actually most of mainland China, it turns out. They don't actually own the property. It's long-term leases. I don't want to say great things about their system of governance there, but they did find a system of managing property rights in China, which has kept, you know, tens of billions of people from not killing each other, which is kind of cool. Good for them. May it remain so. And so there you go. I think MTIPs done with a cooperative residential model have the prospect of capturing all those economic effects, which people like George and Spencer Heath, Spencer McCallum talked about, but also letting us have communities where we get to, you know, have more say than you have when you go to a casino. Yeah, you can complain to the front desk if, you know, the room service isn't good, but I'm not sure that's really what people want. I'm not sure that's what's going to make healthy, long-term, big communities. Yeah, and I'm not asking for democracy. You know how I feel about that, but I think it's perfectly appropriate on that constructive side to have the owners basically own the corporation that owns their community.
Yeah, very. You know, Spencer Heath was president of the Georgia Society for 25 years.
He was a huge fan.
He finally realized that the Georgia's model was basically a justification for a coercive government, and so he said, well, instead of the government collecting the revenue, let's just have the owner collect the revenue, and that's how he got to that position. He's right on board with this idea of, you know, the most efficient tax, but he came up with a lot of reasons why why it just makes more sense to have the one person own. But that's an interesting idea about having the residents own part of the corporation that owns the land. I never thought about
Yeah.
that, actually.
It's still one person. It's still one person ownership, but the person is a legal person. It's a corporation.
And the corporation still has the same incentives for maintaining everything and abiding by their contracts and everything.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, Chris, when you think about it, yeah, even under the more traditional MTIP model, it's usually not actually an individual person that owns, like, Harrods, the casino. It's going to be a corporation. So it's not that big of a change.
Yeah. Steve Wynn doesn't personally own the
And
Wynn
Spencer
Hotels. It's got a huge corporation that runs it. Exactly. Thank you.
Spencer Heath,
I'm sorry, Joyce, go ahead.
sorry. Oh, Spencer Heath talked about the proprietor, which he meant as a proprietary company, corporation, which would quite possibly, shares would be owned by the residents. But he talked about the way that rent works. He was very much opposed to taxation, and he broke with Henry George over the question of taxation, because part of what he envisioned was that the proprietor, the value of the property would include things other than strictly the land, that it would include the governance.
And improvements.
Yeah, and improvements, and that, I mean, he believed that the owner of the property, which might be a corporation, would be the one with the best incentives, and especially if they were getting rent by consent, which I loved the consent chapters in your book.
Oh, good.
Because that makes so much sense, and the levels of consent are much higher when the people are contractually paying rent rather than paying taxes that can be changed coercively, collected coercively and changed unilaterally. So I think his formulation was better than George's.
I agree. And so a couple of things I want to touch on, George, that you raised is, I said improvements and you agreed with me. We should be careful. I'm sure you and I don't mean to use it this way, but we're not talking about structures built in the land by improvements. As you said, it could be the governing system. And I was thinking also, like, marketing, or you think about the original, garden cities, the kind of planning that went into, so you should be rewarded for that. Also, I'll note, since we were talking about sort of great thinkers in this field and what they thought about NTIPs and George's thinking and all that, I'll note that Rothbard was not a fan. Now, there's a very careful bit of work, I think it's in this book by Fred Foldary. And if you haven't read Fred Foldary's stuff, V-A-R-Y. Fred does.
I know Fred.
Yeah. Oh, he's great. His writing is, it doesn't do justice to his ideas. He's kind of like this guy, like, stumbled across these huge, great, important truths. Like, how do you govern better? It's a really big deal. And he's so got it figured out. There's no flourish. It's sort of like, here's the argument and there's how to govern better. Anyhow, Fred, brilliant writer. He's not going to, give you thrills and chills reading his stuff, in terms of the flourishes and the drama, but man, powerful ideas. And he picks this all apart. He's very careful. He says, Rothbard said this. Oh, no, he convinced me, Rothbard said this and Rothbard didn't quite get that right. And look here, Rothbard, actually, he's starting to figure it out. So anyhow, if you're worried about Rothbard not liking some things that our other friends like, probably Rothbard's wrong.
Yeah. Yes.
So does anyone else have any more questions? Any questions?
Oh, yeah, here. Okay, I would like to ask a bit more positive questions. So this time, maybe not as critical. So regarding Ulex, it's a bit an open-ended question, because I thought about, well, the benefits of like law creation with Ulex compared to what we have in current states. And maybe I would love to hear a bit like more about what you would think are the most important advantages of, like, maybe in terms of incentives that you have for law creation with Ulex, and yeah, in contrast to what you have with typical state law.
Uh-huh. Good question, Sebastian. If I think I understand it. You want me to see what I think about Ulex, the incentives there for creating laws versus the more traditional approaches. I think the incentives are right now very good in Ulex, basically because, you know, it's not like I make money. No lobbyist is knocking on my door. And the sources I use for my rules, most of them, of course, I didn't write. Most of them I go out and I find them. And for reasons I can get into, I'm just going to claim this and hopefully you'll kind of trust me. The people who wrote those rules, like take, for example, the Uniform Commercial Code or the Restatement Second of Contracts, they didn't have strong incentives to go one particular way or another. They mostly had good incentives to just do it right, to make it a beautiful, elegant, cohesive, logical piece of work. And I really admire them for that. And I praise them a lot. So thank you. That has changed, by the way. That has changed. And I would say going forward, you can't trust a lot of the sources that I trusted. And here's the other thing, another thing, you shouldn't have to make new laws. You shouldn't have to do a lot more. I think there'll be new versions of Ulex, but part of the idea, this is definitely the idea with Free Society Project. Free Society, in case you haven't heard about it, is basically a bunch of Bitcoin multi-millionaires who are sick of the way governments don't work. And they basically decided, here's what we're going to go do. We're going to go find a small, poor country and buy sovereignty. Now, it turns out you can't quite do it that way, but we're working on it. There's ways to do it. And I'm not kidding. I mean, there really are ways to do it, to work. You do it through a treaty. You don't actually buy sovereignty. But the point is, when we do that, it'll be a turnkey, bare metal jurisdiction. And tentatively, the system is going to be set up so that we're going to try to get really good basic rules in at the start. And then it's going to be, and two things. One, it'll be very hard to amend the rules because you shouldn't need to. You don't need legislation. You got a problem, you got private communities to solve those problems. The basic rule set that keeps the whole system running is very lean and not mean, very efficient and equitable. Efficient and equitable, very lean, very bare bones. And the other thing is we'll probably have built in a legal stability clause, a legal stability clause. These are actually used in international agreements, not uncommonly. They're somewhat controversial, but they are widely used and enforced. And so if you're a big oil company and you're building a big facility in Libya, you're worried not only about the Libyan government coming in and like seizing your refinery, but they could be more subtle about it. The way a developed country does it is they go change the laws. They don't actually have the guys with the guns come to your gate. They change the laws. So what you do before you sink all those millions and millions of dollars into the Libyan desert on your infrastructure is you get an agreement with the government. You get an agreement with the government that says any changes to the law you make after the date we sign this don't apply to me. My laws are stable. So with Ulex in a jurisdiction like Free Society Project, you know, you get enough rules, hopefully at the beginning. We have to war game them. We're going to war game these rules before we actually, you know, install them on the dirt. There'll be lots of test runs. And hopefully this will help us debug the code, right? Before we go live. Going to do a lot of that. You're going to have to. But then, you know, we'll go live and it'll be very basic and it'll be all we need. For more complex structures, you're going to build on the foundation, which is solid, big chunks of law. And on top of that, you can build your fancy, complicated vegan societies where you can't take the Lord's name in vain. And over here, you can do it like Las Vegas. They'll all be on the same basic rules. Nozick's utopia of utopias. That's kind of the goal.
May I ask a small follow-up question? So, yeah, I'm very much with you there. However, I mean, you talked about like the curation of law, that you kind of have to specify certain things, and that there will be maybe technological change, so electronic payments or cryptocurrencies, where you have maybe special application or sub clauses which you maybe have to include. And even though you want to keep like the basic unchangeable, you maybe want to like change the practice there or the application. And I guess a state could also on this level kind of, well, change the application or interpret in a very, well, well, in a way which may hurt like one fraction. So maybe in your case, like interpret it in a way that they maybe get their land seized, though the law maybe didn't change. So maybe is there a way here in which you can, well, the creation of the law, like those sub clauses, will be more aligned with the with what benefits the residents? Certain.
I'm not sure I'll be answering your question, but I'll say some words. Well, again, I'll say a couple points. One is, again, private communities built on top of this foundation can build in more complicated rules if they want to. It'll all be based on consent. So if there's like a, you know, like a trading sector of the industry and they say, oh, the rules that were given to us aren't complicated enough to keep up with our new trading technologies. We need a new set of rules. This is very common. They'll just do the same thing. Another thing to observe is that there will be courts of a sort operating, and there will be something like a common law system operating, but without binding precedent, without a Supreme Court that issues these decisions that bind lower courts. There is now a method, as I mentioned, in Ulex version 1.2 for courts of appeal, but those courts are created like all courts in Ulex. There's no standing judiciary. Those courts are created on the fly, and as soon as the adjudication for that case is done, that court is done. But in that sense, there's going to be higher courts, the decisions of which will govern lower courts in one particular litigation. But the point I'm trying to get at, Sebastian, is there will be a continuing evolution of the law through decisions of adjudicative bodies. They won't be binding, but I have no doubt this is really the way the common law works, because, you know, because lawyers can argue around any case. The reason precedent works really is not really because this case is bound by that case so much as it is. I mean, that does happen, especially in constitutional law. But in the common law, really, what happens is everybody recognizes, oh, that's a good rule. That's a good rule. And the reason you follow that is because other courts have kind of looked at the same problem. They go, oh, it's a tough one. Oh, right. If you do that, then that blows up. So you got to do this. And other courts go, oh, yeah, we're going to do the same thing. And that's going to be going on in Ulex. It'll be persuasive authority. Persuasion's good. That means it's consensual. It's not because there's 9 old people in funny clothes in Washington, D.C. trying to run my life. I hate that. That's going to change in Ulex.
And we have a question from Jonathan, who says, where do you think, oh, sorry, Sebastian, did you have another point you wanted to make?
Oh, no, let me take Jonathan. I got to go because I actually have something else tonight I got to do at 5:30, so I got to stop pretty soon.
How horrible. You have plans on a Sunday night?
That's all right. It's a pleasure, as was this. But I do have to show up on time.
Okay.
So what do I think, Zeddy? So I'm going to take Jonathan's because Sebastian, I have loved your questions. Joyce, everybody, you've asked great questions, but I want to get somebody new. What do you think Zeddy's going to be improved? I'm glad you asked, sir. Is another government? Yes, 2 good questions. So this paper I'm writing about the ZAs is going to compare their governance system to, as I said, 3 other kind of prominent special jurisdictions across the world where they say, we have a great judicial system. And I can tell you, this is kind of giving away the conclusion that the ZAs do much better. But there's still things you could improve. It is a very complicated system. The ZA system, I could show you, I won't bother here, but it's like a spaghetti soup of who does what in a way that makes it strong. There's like checks and balances, but there are some chokeholds in the system. There are some problems in the system. I'll give you just one little example. This isn't maybe the biggest thing, but it's the one that comes to mind. The Judicial Council, which is a branch of the Honduran government, has to approve the judges of the ZA court. Judicial administration in no country is really good and efficient. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but often courts are like the worst of the slow molasses, drag your feet, maybe wait for a bribe to be paid, parts of government. They've managed to make it in Honduras with the ZAs, but I just heard an interview with Eric Bryman, and he was saying, he made very clear that one thing that held them up was they would not pay bribes. And so they didn't get approvals. And they just, no, we're not going to do it. And they didn't get approvals. So anyhow, any place you got, the government has the last word and you can't turn the on switch until somebody signs off on it. That is a design flaw. It's okay to have, of course, you got to have government checks and balances and oversight and everything, but you can't have choke points. You got to have ways around. And this comes clear when you do the kind of diagrams that we're working on. You can see the lines of power. And I think it makes it pop out really clear. Like you look at the Astana, the legal system, basically, if the president doesn't like some litigation down in his special jurisdiction, he can just pick up the phone and say, yeah, you want your job? Here's how you decide that case. Click. That's bad. The SEZs system is much better, but it could be better yet. Another thing, another government invention increasing. Yes, I think many governments are interested. Well, I'm being over-exaggerating. I'm exaggerating my optimism. There are some governments that I think are interested in the ZA system. It has not blown up yet. It's something new. It's radical. I'm out there talking it up all the time. I'll tell you this, friend. Every time I talk to the government, some government agent or some consultant who's going to go talk to the government agent who's going to talk to the government, whatever, I tell them, that's what you got to beat. The Honduran ZA system is a cutting edge system, and it's good. And they've thought it through really carefully. No guarantees, but it really has a lot of good things going on there. And if you're going to build a system and it's not going to be that good, why? So basically, it's already becoming kind of a lodestar. And that's great. I really hope it succeeds. It could fail for reasons that have nothing at all to do with its structure. And it could fail because of things in the structure which we've all missed. But I feel really good about it. And people I know and respect have worked really hard a long time on it. I think it's going to work.
Excellent. Great. Well, Tom, thank you so much for your time. And everyone, thank you so much for asking all the great questions. Tom, do you want to sign us off with some words of wisdom, if you want?
Well, I'll thank you all for taking an interest in my book. It interests me too. It's really a huge part of my life. And like I say, I've met some great people who care about the same things that I care about. And I think we're right to care about those things. Getting government right, super important. And the last words I'll say to you are, may your next government be your best government.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you all. Bye.
Have a great evening, everyone.
See you later, Joe.
Live, prosper.
Tom. Like,
Thanks,
live long and
Joe.
prosper.